doubt myself. I remember when money felt hard to attract. I remember when I was constantly stressed about the future. I remember when I felt unworthy of love. I remember when I thought success was for other people. I remember when I struggled to believe in my dreams. I remember when fear controlled my decisions. I remember when I felt stuck in the same cycle. I remember when I overthought everything. I remember when I felt disconnected from my purpose. I remember when I lacked confidence in myself. I remember when I worried about what people thought of me. I remember when I felt emotionally drained all the time. I remember when abundance seemed far away. I remember when I didn't trust life to work out for me. I remember when I settled for less than I deserved. I remember when I carried pain from the past every day. I remember when I felt lonely even around people. I remember when I struggled to feel peace within myself. I remember when happiness felt difficult to hold on to. I remember when I doubted my own power. I remember when I thought my situation would never change. I remember when I lived with constant anxiety. I remember when I felt blocked from my blessings. I remember when I stayed in toxic situations too long. I remember when I was afraid to take chances. I remember when I felt overwhelmed by life. I remember when I looked outside myself for validation. I remember when I felt disconnected from abundance. I remember when I believed I had to struggle for everything. I remember when I had trouble trusting myself. I remember when I focused more on problems than possibilities. I remember when I felt powerless over my life. I remember when I didn't feel good enough. I remember when I thought love had to be chased. I remember when I lived in survival mode. I remember when I felt lost and uncertain. I remember when I was afraid to dream bigger. I remember when negative thoughts filled my mind. I remember when I doubted that life could get better. I remember when I struggled to let go of the past. I remember when I felt unsupported and misunderstood. I remember when I feared failure more than growth. I remember when I blocked my own happiness. I remember when I felt disconnected from peace. I remember when I believed limitations define me. I remember when I constantly expected the worst. I remember when I questioned my ability to succeed. I remember when I carried emotional weight everywhere I went. I remember when I forgot how powerful my mind truly is. I remember when I stressed over every dollar. I remember when I believed wealth was hard to reach. I remember when I felt blocked financially. I remember when I worried about not having enough. I remember when I struggled to receive abundance. I remember when I doubted my ability to create wealth. I remember when I thought opportunities passed me by. I remember when I felt trapped by lack. I remember when money caused me fear and anxiety. I remember when I believed success had to be difficult. I remember when I felt behind in life financially. I remember when I worked hard without feeling rewarded. I remember when abundance felt out of reach. I remember when I thought financial freedom was impossible for me. I remember when I felt guilty for wanting more. I remember when I underestimated my value. I remember when I feared remember when I doubted I could be fully loved. I remember when I felt emotionally unavailable. I remember when I feared opening my heart. I remember when I thought healthy love was rare. I remember when I struggled to trust in relationships. I remember when I looked for love outside myself. I remember when I tolerated mixed signals and confusion. I remember when I settled for bare minimum effort. I remember when I felt lonely in relationships. I remember when I attracted emotionally unavailable people. Remember when I ignored my own needs to please others. I remember when I questioned my worth in love. I remember when I believed love had to be painful. I remember when I was afraid of being vulnerable. I remember when I held on to relationships that were already over. I remember when I doubted that true love could find me. I remember when I stayed guarded because of past pain. I remember when I forgot that love should feel peaceful. I remember when I didn't realize I deserved a healthy, genuine, loving connection.